Hello and welcome. This is From Upside Down to Right Side Up, Tips for the Transition. I'm Maria Tomás-Keegan, your host, and this is my continuing series of conversations with strong, supportive women who have inspiring stories to tell of their own transformation, and they're courageous enough to share them with us here. On today's show, my guest is Deanna Shoss. Her story is about wanting a child, struggling to get pregnant, and grieving, giving up on her dream. What she learned from that experience prepared her for different life challenges. We call this episode Letting Go of the Outcome. Welcome, Deanna.
Thank you, Maria. Thanks so much for having me.
I am looking forward to digging into your story a bit and hearing how it changed your perspective on life. You assumed your life would go one way and had been planning for it, perhaps unconsciously. What happened that threw you off track?
I would say the moment I remember being in a restaurant in 1999, and I was out to dinner with my husband. We used to have regular Friday night date nights. And my husband looked at me and said, I can't do this anymore. It's too emotional, the ups and downs. And I knew exactly what he was talking about. At this point, we had been married for 12 years. We had actually stopped using birth control when we had moved to Chicago 5 years prior. So in 1994, and it just, for the past couple of years, we had actually realized there was potentially a problem about having a child. And at this point, he said, I just can't do it. And I knew exactly what he was talking about, because every month you would get so excited and then your cycle would come, and it was such an emotional roller coaster. And maybe I had thought it, but he was the first to say, I can't do this anymore. And I remembered getting up from the table, saying, I'll be right back, and going into the bathroom and just staring in the mirror, realizing that, my life and my desire to have a child was completely tied to my husband, realizing that, oh my God, this means I'm not going to have children. And it wasn't just because of the decision, it's because it wasn't happening for us. And so from that moment, it was very difficult. We went from that moment, it felt like I should have had some sort of external change in my appearance. Like my skin should have changed colors, or my hair stood on end, just for people to know this is something monumental happening in our lives. At that point, my husband and I started thinking, oh, maybe we'll do other things. But before we could get to that point, it took a lot of soul searching, because at that moment, it made you have to decide how badly did you want a child. It put all these things that I just hadn't realized were there. So first was, I had been thinking we're trying to have a child, we're trying to get something that we don't have. When I realized that we wouldn't be having children, it suddenly was this really deep loss. It was really unconsciously realizing that this was something as a woman that I always just assumed would happen, and that it was my choice. And at this point, it wasn't. It was almost happening to me, and it was a loss. And I remember actually one year, I'm of Jewish faith, and on one of the Jewish holidays, they have the point where everyone goes around and says the name of someone who they've lost, someone who's died over the past year. And not even realizing I was going to do it, I stood up and said the name Leah Bonaventura, which, in my mind would have been the name of if I had a girl, of our child. So it was the idea of mourning the loss of our unborn child. Through this time period, just the story itself, you don't realize how invasive questions are. So when people would meet my husband and I, they would say, oh, how long have you been married? At this point, 14 years. Oh, why don't you have children? Or oh, you're not going to have children? And I know that it seemed so innocent, but I would get so angry. And I think there were times I would even snap at people because it became such an emotionally charged question. The other thing that would happen is people trying, I'm sure, to be well-meaning, but this idea of, oh, well, can't you adopt? Or, oh, can't you, can't you do in vitro? Or can't you do this, surrogates? There's all these things that can be done to have a baby. What it realized, and many people would never get to the depths of making a conscious idea about their philosophy around this, but it made me have to answer and justify that I didn't feel that it was right. It felt like sort of the extreme of capitalism, that if you really wanted to, you could manufacture a child. It also made you have to justify things like, well, what if we did all this work and spent all this time and then our child had a disability? What a horrible question. Because, on the other side, I'm sure a parent would say, I love my child, no matter what. But when you're on the front side of it, having to being forced to make decisions about things that really nobody should need to. And I'm reminded, this is just a story that was so poignant to me that kind of put things in perspective. Is I was taking a cab ride to a meeting one day, and the cab driver asked me the question, chit chat, how about kids? And that was one of those times where, I said, I got to tell you, I don't like that question. My husband and I, are going through an awful thing. It's a really personal question. My cab driver was a man who was probably a little bit younger than me, from Pakistan. And at that moment, he said, my wife and I are going through the same thing. He said, I know exactly what you're talking about. And I remember when we got to the destination, he asked me if I wanted a receipt for the cab ride. And I said, please, I do. And it was this moment where he looked at me, he just threw me the entire booklet of receipts. So it was like 50 receipts. And we both shared such a deep laugh, because it was the idea of the world has so much abundance, and it might not be for us right now, but that you can always find people to share that with and connect with about. So, that was really moving. And I think that what I realized, and I guess, and I'm stumbling now because there's so much between what actually happened. I mean, the full story is, what I realized is, I didn't want this to be the one thing that would stop me, that I would be, 60 or 70 or as I 80, as I got older, and this would be the one moment in my life that I couldn't get over, because the amount of depth of yearning and regret that you can have from something this big could be insurmountable. And that's when I realized that I needed a conscientious process to let go of the desire to have a child. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Were you going to ask?
Yeah. I'm mouthing wow. Because that's why we call this, right, letting go of the outcome. So help me understand how you let go of the outcome and what happened next.
What's interesting, there's a gentleman who I work with at the Department of Aviation when I used to work there. And our commissioner at the time, whenever there were flight delays, would have us operate lemonade stands. And so one day for 4 hours, I was at the lemonade stand with Pius, who, after 4 hours, you're talking about everything. And he mentioned a book to me called Conversations with God. And he mentioned the book because I was sharing the idea of what I was going through. We had 4 hours, and he said, from this book, it really talks about the idea of letting go of outcomes. And it's hard to let go of an outcome. What that really means is, I thought life was going to be one way. I was unconsciously planning or consciously planning for my life to be that way. And now, how do I let go and turn this over to the universe to allow what will be, to allow for any outcome, and to really feel within my soul and my core that outcome will be okay. So that that process actually did start with reading the book. And the reason that I mentioned pious is because when I was eventually 9 months pregnant at the airport, I would look at Pius like, Pius, this is great. And because I always felt just a little connection to him for kind of getting that ball rolling. It was through reading the book. It was through a lot of writing. It was through future planning with my husband. Mm-hmm. He actually had an opportunity through the company where he was working at the time to relocate to Italy, which the person who was unconsciously thinking of raising a child, that wouldn't have even been a possibility. I need a stable job. I need my house to be ready for this child. Once that's not going to happen, what I realized is it was so empowering, Maria. I realized I could actually do anything I wanted to in the world. And once I had that transformation and realized it, and then the process of sort of grieving the loss of this unborn child, I said to the universe, I realize this isn't my fate. I know that I have love in my heart to care for a child. If there's a child you need me to care for, I know that I can do it, but I accept, where I am. And what's funny, I'm smiling because about 3 days later, my sister-in-law called from Brazil, where my husband's from, and her husband, unfortunately, had passed away, and they needed help with her son, who was 12 at the time. And so he did indeed end up coming to live with us. But I remember I was laughing, thinking like my prayer was answered. I had forgotten to specify age. So what's amazing though is that 6 months after I went through this process to really say I want to live fully, I want to be fully present in my life with whatever eventuality it would be, Andre came to live with us. 6 months after that, I was actually pregnant with Luca.
Wow.
So it was amazing. And we were so positive. People always say, oh, how's the first trimester? It can be so hard. We were so positive that we couldn't have children. I actually thought I was going through menopause. I thought, well, there you go. Now I'll really never have children. That we were 3 months along before finally we said, well, maybe we should do a test. So I missed the first trimester. And then was pregnant with my son, Luca, who's now actually going to be 18 tomorrow, who's now a young man.
Wow.
Or as he tells me, a full-grown adult.
Happy birthday to the miracle baby, Luca.
Yes, yeah.
That is such a powerful story, Deanna, that I'm sure a lot of women are going to connect with. Whether it was giving up the dream of having a child or giving up some other dream that they just held on to for dear life. And it wasn't until they found the power that is behind the concept of letting go of the outcome and allowing things to happen when you relax, when you decide that you can go to Italy for this grand opportunity because you have nothing tying you here. That's when things start to happen, and they happened beautifully for you. I'm thrilled for you, and I'm so glad that you have come here to tell your story to us. So thank you so much for that. And I can't wait to hear more. You've been through a lot. You didn't even get to the other life-changing moments like your breast cancer and your back surgery. And so all of this must have been an emotional ride. And I know you've told me that figuring out, kind of cracking the code on letting go of the outcome helped you in those times as well. So I would love if you would take us on that emotional ride in our next segment and share some of that with you, how you dealt with it and how you overcame it. Would you do that with us?
Absolutely, of course.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I invite everyone to just stay tuned to the rest of my conversation with Deanna Shoss. I'm Maria Tomás-Keegan. Till next time.